Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Speculative Speculations. I'm Varsha,
I'm Steve.
I'm Jared.
And I'm Chris.
and this is a sci fi podcast where we talk about sci fi stories in all their forms. Today, we are going to be talking about the short story Understand by Ted Chiang, which can be found in the short story collection Stories of Your Life and Others, also by Ted Chiang. It's a Ted Chiang anthology. Or collection, and we're going to be talking about the first chapter of Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. It's the first book of the Southern Reach trilogy, and Dan is joining us today for the discussion of Annihilation. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Dan, and I'm a big fan of science fiction, especially old school sci-fi like Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, and Ray Bradbury.
Nice. And you read Annihilation before, right,
yes.
Dan?
I read Annihilation, the trilogy, one time. I don't remember the details, though. There's a lot of details. So
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we read the first chapter, and I think pretty much all of us that I've heard wanted to keep going. It's too much to ask to wait for. It might be some recency inputs, but I've been rewatching Lost with my mom, and this reminded me a lot of Lost. What did you guys think?
never watched it. So
Oh,
What?
Wow.
yeah. It definitely had that jungle adventure kind of feels to it. That's got kind of start to it. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah. I think both show and book here do a lot. It's very, very start about setting the scene and giving you a kind of feel for not just what it looks like, what it feels like, what it smells like, the kind of temperature, all of that kind of stuff is very much there. And the start of Lost does that to 360 in the first episode with him standing, waking up from the crash and looking around, and you get the smell or you get the fire burning and all of that kind of stuff. And there's a very definite sense of that coming here. And then when they travel through, you get to meet the wildlife and the kind of location and everything that's going on. So I can definitely see where that allegory comes from.
Yeah, and this was published in 2014, so I was almost wondering, I meant to look this up and I forgot, but I was wondering if Vandermeer was influenced by Lost in some form, or if they were both influenced by some other story like this. But
I
It
mean,
did.
Lost is probably influenced by all those castaway stories that have been, very popular for a long time. So
Yeah, and it does pull you right in, doesn't it? A tower that's plunging into the ground.
It's a tunnel.
Is it a tower or is it a tunnel? And it seems that we are in a literal black forest because there's a lot of black images that come up. I think the swamp water, and I think even the leaves are black.
Yeah.
Oh, it says the black pine forest. That's the
right.
second line.
Right in the second line. Yeah.
I guess also as an introduction, can I ask everyone, have you seen the movie of Annihilation?
I have.
There's no. Okay.
Yes, I have to.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think even if you've seen it, I don't think it's going to spoil anything. The story is very different. It captures the feeling of the book in a very good way, which I think it makes it like a perfect adaptation. Like it captures the feeling, but it has to adjust it for the cinema because you wouldn't be able to make this book into a compelling movie, I think, if you just copied one by one. So even if you've seen it, I don't think it's a spoiler for the book.
Interesting. I didn't know there was a movie. So.
It's pretty good. It's very good.
Very visually appealing and very visually well thought out, very much so.
Yeah. That's cool. This story has some what it seems like there's some horror coming up. It's not there yet, but it gives me that feel that there's a little bit of horror coming up, and horror is often blended with sci-fi to good effect a lot. But it was like right in that first paragraph, you get, something that's not supposed to be there. Check. You get abandoned setting. Check. You get an expedition. Check. and you get can't see a threat despite the ominous setting. You know,
Mm.
and so everything was, just I was going down a checklist, reading the first paragraph, like, all right, everything's there for the setup, and I'm ready to roll. And then, of course, always having the first person narration, really sucks you in when you're reading something like this. So it's interesting.
And the fact that it's the 12th expedition now, isn't it? Isn't it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
either some of them don't come back, and anybody who does come back has no memory of what happened. Then, so again, all of these kind of mystery upon mystery upon mystery is
Yeah.
been doled out.
Lots of mystery elements. Yeah.
And they have to keep notebooks because they aren't allowed to communicate because they might contaminate the outside world, like even with their cell phones and devices. So just talking, like not physical contamination. Apparently, there could be the possibility of some mental contamination too. So that was really interesting as well. It almost feels like, and I think this is true of Lost as well, and it almost feels like the environment is a character, right? Like this
Oh yeah.
Very much.
additional thing that you have to worry about, and it has seems to be malicious or has some sort of vindictiveness or some agenda of its own that they have to work out and figure out what to do with. So yeah, overall I think it was a really great start. What did
I
you
think you can feel the tension, right, in the writing and what's happening. There is some tension. You don't know where it's coming from exactly, but it feels like something is always about to happen, right?
yeah
I think one of the ways in which Vandermeer does that, he kind of gives everybody a title. It's almost very video gamey. The way you've got the psychologist, the biologist, that kind of stuff. Everything is there, and as the definite article as being these, rather than these people being people, that they are characters or they sort of have some role to play, not only just on the mission but within the story itself. And it does create that bit of mystery, and you kind of being suspicious of why everybody's there. And obviously we get some of that with the psychologist and the phrases that she uses to control, etc., that are in there. We even get that in the first chapter. But yes, that very interesting narrative concept, I think, in the writing terms, to kind of give everybody that kind of moniker.
Yeah, you get that classic role-playing game setup where you have your classes, your archaeologists and your psychologists and whatever they were, and the biologists, and so you get that that kind of class setup to begin with, where everybody has their role, and then of course I think part of the fun is going to be seeing who goes outside of their role and who diverts from it, and of course we get right off the bat, of course, our main narrator is, of course, the one who's veering a little bit.
and
It's fun.
she's saying that only the survey is going to last more than a couple of days. So that's scary too. What's going to happen to the others? The psychologist is also interesting because she seems malicious, or at least we almost get this, I guess, since from the narrator's point of view, it almost seems like she seems malicious, but maybe she's just doing her job, right? That's what the government or whoever sent her out on this expedition, that's her role in all of this, to say those things. And the narrator seems to be slightly unreliable too, right? Like with their interpretations of the psychologist's expressions, like she's throwing in some contingencies, like maybe I was thinking wrongly about this, maybe something else is going on there, but she has opinions that but kind of like that are being filtered into us. So like we're sort of seeing the world the way she is, but also with the understanding that like there's also a distance and coldness to her that makes it so like so that you don't necessarily believe her all the time. I think was that your experience as well with this narrator? What did you think of her?
I think I trust her more than the others. Yeah.
Is that just because she's Natalie Portman? I don't know. I think from my point of view, you definitely get a sense that each of them are suspicious of each other, that they all see that their role as being the most important one. Like even the line, isn't it the linguist that's gone? Like what use would a linguist have been anyway until they come up to a situation where actually a linguist would have been really useful, but they kind of are dismissive of each other's skill sets in some ways, saying like obviously we're in an alien environment. A biologist is the most important thing that anybody could possibly think of, is the way she's saying, which serves its purpose psychologically, but as you say, kind of gives her an unreliable narrator tag very much just by doing that.
Yeah.
And our narrator actually admits to a certain amount of contrariness, just by the fact that she's determined to call this a tower and everyone else is calling it a tunnel. And so she actually admits to that in her telling us, about herself.
Yeah. And to add to that, I was wondering what you guys thought about like how the characters behave and how they're characterized, I guess, in their emotions. To me, they feel a bit sort of abstracted. Like it doesn't feel like they're really living, breathing characters. It feels more like someone describing, maybe in a bit of a clinical way, like a scientific way, what other humans, he did that because of that reason and that reason. But we're not feeling the emotions. You know what I mean? But it could be just because our narrator is very scientifically minded, as we've already seen her describe herself, right? So it could just be like another characterization of how her thought pattern is. Like this is all just filtered through her, and this is just another way that it is filtered through her view. But what do you guys think?
I think they all kind of serve a role, and you wonder if they're trying to if their role in this expedition has become their identity, and they feel like they have to fit in a certain way. It's a very uneasy. It's Dan, you mentioned tension. It's not only tension with Area X, it's tension from the Northern Reach Company, who is kind of organized, and it's tension within the group. So you get the feeling like this little group can fall apart at any moment. So even a disagreement over whether it's a tunnel or a tower can lead to a fracture in the group or a distrust. So it's you expect something something will go wrong, but you just don't know by what direction it will come from.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Dan, because even the thing about the tower and the tunnel, she takes it as a bit of a win when people start referring to it as a tower, as if she's sort of creating alliances or creating influence or exerting influence over the group, and as who she is, even in her small way. She's like, oh, the people are calling the tower, I'm winning this this battle for control of this group or influence of this group, which is kind of the first bit that we look at, that there is sort of some interconnectivity between them, because they are very much have their own separate roles at the start, and that they didn't seem to do a lot of orientation training or team building beforehand. They didn't do the kind of falling backwards and catch you thing that everybody else has to do.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but did they have to? Because they were supposed to all be under the hypnotic control of these psychologists.
Yeah.
So was the company relying upon that to keep them together? And of course, our narrator is going to screw everything up if that's the case.
Well, it does seem that they're sort of doing it to themselves. Like, I don't know, like if we're thinking about the typical horror movie story setup, right? You always think, oh, they're going to split up and they're going to get caught one by one. And they seem, sometimes I'm like, oh, why are you sending just one person down on their own into the tunnel, right? I'm like, this seems, I would just want to stay with everyone else and just move together as a group. And even when they go to sleep, everyone in their own tent. It's like the perfect setup, sort of, for that to happen.
Yeah.
Like a canary in a coal mine, almost. Like, go ahead and go check it out, and we'll see you, or maybe not. Like,
You're the surveyor. You go survey the area.
Yeah, I think maybe Vandermeer is leaving us, the reader, room to make up our own reasons why they would want to be off on their own like that. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was that they all got an ego. They're all experts in their field, and they all have an ego, and they want to prove themselves. And I'm sure you could probably fill in other reasons on our own why why they're acting the way they are.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, especially because we've been reading the Masterwork series as well. This is another very short book in terms of like sci-fi world building or otherwise. And I think if that's your intention, you have to create a situation where you respect your reader to be able to fill in a lot of the blanks here themselves, or they speculate themselves. Only give them little breadcrumbs or write in a certain way that gives an idea or a sense of this without necessarily needing to spell everything out. You keep the book short, and it creates a lot of speculation for the reader, creates a lot of kind of ideas of what could be happening. It makes the imagination build then in what is still, like I'd say, a more modern sci-fi book in terms that it has strong narrative here. Like I definitely think that's very much a difference from some of the SF Masterworks, the earlier books that we were reading.
Yeah. I was wondering. Sorry, go ahead, Barsha.
Oh, I was gonna jump off of that to start a new topic, but go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was also gonna start a new topic, so you can go ahead.
Okay. I was gonna say, yeah, like some things that I just casually mentioned, right? Like talking about filling in the pieces and getting as cared as we might want to, or thinking as much about a situation as we might. For instance, I think the way she talks about the tunnel as if it's a reflection of the lighthouse. Like she says the lighthouse is on the beach, and then this tunnel/tower thing must be a part of it somehow. How does that even work? Like, what is this world, right? So there's a lot of strangeness that I think maybe it'll be explained, but it's also possible that we're just expected to interpret and build our own pictures there.
I think she says something like she sees in her mind the lighthouse sort of moving and dropping like this underground part before settling at the beach, right? Which is like, why would you ever think that?
Yeah.
This makes no sense. Right?
Right. And she's worried to sharing her vision with the psychologist in case they think her crazy.
Reasonably so.
But you have to think if they've sent a psychologist before to control the group with hypnosis, and the spore that's already been explored before is what's preventing her from being controlled, then maybe their plan isn't so great, because it's may have led to the failures of the other groups, that they weren't able to be controlled and they went off reservation and they did something,
Yeah, that's a solid theory there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't think about like whether the composition stayed the same or if they changed it over each expedition too. And also it seems that we have a lot fewer people in this one than the previous one, because there are only 4, and I think she talks about 12 people returning, or was it 8 returning from the previous expedition. So they're cutting the numbers smaller, but why is that?
I think they're saying that they're changing the variables every time. Like, this is the first expedition with only women. And I think they're changing the members, the number of people, the stuff they're bringing, right? Like different permutations each expedition. I think she says that.
I was going to say downsizing, but yeah, that sounds good.
That could also be it.
Upgrading and downsizing, yes, indeed.
Oh, that's hilarious. What did you guys think of the things that the psychologist used to manipulate them? Those, just the phrases that she used felt awfully creepy to me. And I think in a way that made her feel malicious, because she's trying to take control in some way, and it's even unclear what it is that she's trying to do, because those phrases don't seem to make a lot of sense. And so I think they add a dimension of like, I guess, another layer of psychological horror there for like the dynamics within this group.
I think the phrases are supposed to not make sense because it's like phrases that you're not going to randomly say, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
But maybe are still supposed to have somewhat of the, like, the words are supposed to connect somewhat to the psychology. That way it's easier for the brain to react to it or something like that. I don't know. That's what I was thinking about.
But it's a well, like has been said, a well done horror trope to kind of give the idea that each individual is not in control of the person who's got control within the group. Like the whole idea of the thing is the fact that you could just lose your sense of identity. And we've talked about this in another couple of books as well. And the idea that if anybody's been to see like a hypnotist and they just say the words and sleep, the person who is on the stage at the time totally loses all control of what they were going to do. And these suggestive phrases do much the same for that, is that while all these people have been recruited for their skills, they're not actually in control of themselves. Actually, they could be controlled and become automatons, depending on how they're conditioning and programming as well.
That's interesting. One of the lines that early on was names belong to where we had come from, not who we were while embedded in Area X. So that just lends further credence to focusing on their occupation rather than who they actually were, and ties into that. It might tie into the psychological aspect of what they're trying to do.
Well, they probably have to leave their identities, their personal identities, at the door, and just focus on the job, on the role they play in the group to survive, and not so much of, almost like become a soldier or a robot and just, I don't want to say follow orders, but kind of you don't think you wouldn't, you just focus on the mission and not on what you think. It's about the mission, not about you. So maybe.
And oh god, what was I gonna say? Yeah, I think it's really clever narratively that the first thing that goes wrong with her is that she stops taking hypnotic suggestions so that we can see it happening. Like that we have a first person narrator, but if she were to be hypnotized herself, how would we see that happening? We got the first example of when crossing the border, she was hypnotized, but she didn't remember anything. Just some really intense and somewhat scary suggestions of like shaking light and what was the border, what did they cross, and so on and so forth. But you can only do that a certain number of times before it gets old. So watching the hypnosis from the outside, I think, was really interesting, and it was I think it's somewhat clever too, so we can see like what's going on there psychologically. So
there's also the incident with the boar.
Oh yeah.
The boar, if it was behaving naturally, it should have finished its charge through, and it gives the idea that again the boar wasn't in control of its own kind of base instinct at a certain point. Something else took control of the boar at that stage and made it veer off course, kind of, and just go another direction.
What do you think it was?
Yeah. It says it had another presence in it. Almost makes me, the outlandish theory I have is that it's one of the dead people from the previous expeditions.
Oh.
Not maybe reborn, but like some sort of mind-bending possession thing. Like he possessed a boar or she possessed a boar.
I keep wondering if this is some kind of experiment, like a social or psychological experiment to see how people react in certain situations.
That's
What was your predictions based on what you read up to now? Yeah, that's what I was interested to, knowing everyone's prediction of what's actually happening while knowing pretty much nothing.
Yeah, it's based on what I read. I haven't seen the movie or anything, so it's based on what I read so far.
Yeah. It's a bit difficult for me because I've seen the movie, and while I can't really remember a lot of details about it, I don't know whether the movie has influenced the things that I'm seeing, even subconsciously from the story, that kind of stuff. So I have a couple of theories, but I'm like, maybe that was in the movie, though. Maybe that is part of the sense that I got even just watching the movie because of the visual nature of the storytelling. So I'm sort of on the fence about even what to say sometimes, because I'm like, and I could be totally off base because I really don't. I kind of know the start and I know the end of the movie. That's kind of where my memory sits, but so I'm not sure actually what's
the end is not the same though, so I don't think it's a spoiler. It's completely different.
Oh, okay. Good.
So
Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a relief.
like some of the themes you're gonna recognize
Mhm.
as we go, but some of the context and maybe the order and like what happens at the end is different. So, but they had to do it because it's a they had to do it to make it a coherent movie.
Mm.
Are the images that you see in your head as you read, do they look similar to the movie? I think this is, for me, again, one of those books that even though I don't tend to visualize, I have a lot of mental imagery in my head because of the way everything is described. So I was curious, for those of you who've seen the movie, how is that influencing the pictures that you see in your head?
100%. That's what I see in my head when I read. I think it's hard not to. And I'm kind of, I was I'm glad I saw the movie, but I think it gives me an idea of what it looks like because there's not a lot of detail on
That's right.
on what what the walls or what this like enclosure. Because in the movie you get more of a claustrophobic feeling of like you're in a space, and you don't have as much of that in the book.
Is the tower in the movie? I forgot. I saw it so long ago.
I'm not sure. Again, there's the middle part of the story. I don't remember. There's like the general feeling that I got or I get from the movie is that things just aren't quite right in the world. You know, everything, you know, as they move through the jungle, everything's just a little bit off. Even like the description of the tower, whether it's in it or not, she's calling it a tower, but there's more of it below the ground than there is above it. You know, so it is a tower, but it's also a structure that subterranean.
It's a very structured tunnel, but
It's a classic D&D dungeon. That's what it is. They go down the dungeon.
Is it both?
It's Terraria. Shit, there we go.
so what did you guys think of the tower itself? The writing on the wall was incredibly interesting. I thought that.
That was a highlight of the chapter, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. For me too.
Very creepy.
Yeah, the idea that like plants are growing in a direction to write words, and the fact that she got sucked in by those words to the point where she would like probably keep going, forgetting about all her bodily needs to finish whatever's being written on the wall.
How could you resist? Like, she read that part and didn't want to know more. Like, what kind of if she had to have some kind of extreme willpower not to want to read more, and especially since she thinks she's also might be being influenced by the spores, as well as her natural scientific curiosity. That would take an extreme amount of willpower, at least on my part, to not just keep going and read it and then get killed by the monster down below, whatever.
Really?
but you know, so that, and it's I just found that interesting that she could turn back like that.
That was the opposite for me. I was like, why are you still here? As soon as I saw it, like I got the feeling I want to get out, right? I don't want to. That's the feeling I got. So I guess very different perspective.
Yeah.
If they only had a planned a weekly podcast meetup that says she had to stop at a certain point and she couldn't go any further, that's how you get self-control and not continue on and read on.
Yeah, there you go.
Kindling.
Yeah, I was going to say, apparently it took some of us a lot of self-control to not keep going in this book. So it's relatable-ish.
Yeah. Well, Vash has got me reading too much, so I had no problem
Yeah.
picking something else up.
Varsha is reading too much, so she had no problem stopping either.
If you want an alternative name for the channel apart from reading by the Rainy Mountain, you could just Varsha is reading too much. That is weird.
I like that.
But a line early on in like page 6 or whatever that I think points to what I think may happen as far as prediction goes. It says the beauty of it cannot be understood either, and when you see beauty in desolation, it changes something inside you. Desolation tries to colonize you. And thought that was a pretty good line. I like that
Yeah.
a lot. It's pretty profound, and I think when those spores basically colonized her, which I think that's what they did, that tells us something right there. That there's some desolation coming as a result of this
Mhm.
this colonization of our main character. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's not going to be good.
Mm.
Who knows?
And it is a reporting of events that happened, right? Like from a future where they already happened, presumably.
Mhm.
So, and she seems like distant and cold and desolate to a certain extent. So that makes a lot of sense. What you just pointed out.
Or
And the
we'll
tar,
see.
the tar does everything that happens in the tar kind of does speak to an intelligence, though it isn't just
Mhm.
random life, kind of growing away. It does speak that there's a sort of, like say, intelligence kind of to the world or to events that are happening.
Mm.
Yeah. I don't know if it also gives anyone else this feeling, but to me, it gives a bit of a very inspired from like eldritch sort of stories and that sort of stuff. Like, oh, it's something that should not be touched, something that's powerful, right? It's got that mysterious element, that sort of compulsion, right? That, I don't know, it gives me very same feelings to when I was reading, what was it, Mountains of Madness, or what's up with Colors from Outer Space or something.
Yeah, color of space. Yeah.
Yeah, it has similar vibes for me.
Cool.
Yeah.
And there was another passage that later on, after she encountered the spores and all that stuff, and she's talking to her peers there, and she asked them a bunch of questions like, what is its purpose, and is it believable that it would not be on the maps, and could one of the prior expeditions have built it and hidden it, and a bunch of more questions. And I was like, that whole sequence and that paragraph seemed to be put in there for what the reader's asking. It didn't seem to me that that the characters, it seemed a bit too obvious that the characters would be asking each other those questions directly like that, because they were all probably thinking the same thing, like all this stuff, that all those questions, and that seemed to be put in there specifically for the reader to grasp a hold of the questions that needed to be answered, and but it also ties into what we were talking about, the questions we've already brought up today.
Yeah.
So it's clever writing.
Very clever. I found it compelling, interesting, and very detailed.
Mm.
Yeah, you really want to know what's going to happen next. Like what's behind all of this? What happened to the previous expeditions, right? What's under what's at the end of a tower?
It also has that lost feeling a bit, like Varsha was talking about. In the fact, I just sort of want to, at this stage, want to know what's around the next corner. You know what I mean? I just, if I go down a level, or if I go over there, like Skyrim, any kind of D&D kind of thing will do this. Well, go that direction. What we'll find, and it's probably going to be interesting in some way. And in doing so, I'll learn a bit more about our environment and that there is. Yeah.
And to that, I think she also says that it's very interesting that this is an area which has a lot of different sort of biomes, all concentrated in a short area. So it seems like that's gonna matter. The reason, like why there's like the beach and the swamp and the forest, and I don't remember what else there was. But
and the flora and fauna was different enough to what we were used to. That there's something, definitely strange going on here.
Yeah, that makes me think. Like I'm trying to remember. Do they say where in the U.S. we are? Like East Coast, West Coast.
Well, it's called the Southern Reach, so I thought it was in the South, but
but I think to that point, Dan, that's one of the things that really struck me at the very start of it. They sort of just drop you in. You know, you're just kind of airdrop. It's almost like you're airdropped into this area. You're not given context for how it appeared, what was kind of the design, what they thought might happen, all what their intentions are, even in a lot of ways. We sort of project our own intentions in that they're kind of scientific, but you don't really know that. That's kind of all. It's just kind of like part of the mystery to just drop you in. We're setting off on the 12th expedition here. There's 11 that's went before. Some people came back, some people didn't, and it's a bit weird.
I think there's going to be a lot of that, like sort of through the books, sort of thinking back to what happened before and filling in the gaps or putting together all the pieces that we were given before, but we didn't know how to put together.
Yeah.
There's definitely going to be a lot of that.
Nice.
Yeah. That is anybody. So there is a sense of release or feeling free that our narrator, the biologist, doesn't hypnotic suggestions anymore. It's like, yeah, you go, girl. But also, are you a tiny bit afraid for her that we don't know what could go wrong for her because she didn't take the suggestion?
Oh yeah, you got weird spores inside you now,
Yeah.
or on you somewhere or something like that, and you're not, your mind and body are not reacting how everybody else's mind and body is reacting. So yeah, there's a couple of fears there.
Yeah.
And she says that like the hypnotic compulsions were there to help them face what might be like for example, getting into the area. She says they need to be under hypnotic compulsion, otherwise it would be impossible, it would be too much for their minds. So maybe now that she doesn't have, that could be a protection that she doesn't have anymore for something that might happen, right?
And I've seen Last of Us. I know what Spore's job is. I'm also reading Entangled Life. Steve's also read it, but the purpose of Spores and what they do. If she's not under the hypnotic suggestion of a psychologist, then who is in control? Kind of begs that question,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think the psychologist knows what's going on, like what's going on in this area? Because she seems to know a lot more than what she's telling everyone else.
She might have been briefed. I would be surprised if she doesn't know that our biologist wasn't faking it, because I think you would sort of even small slight delays would stand out,
Yeah, you would think that, but then there were a couple of points where our narrator was pointing out that she thought her psychologist wasn't doing psychologist-like things. So I wonder if that's just our narrator's point of view and that's unreliable, or is our psychologist also something else that we don't know about?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And she says that the psychologist maybe is from a management background.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a jab to the kidneys.
Poking the bear.
Oh yeah. So yeah.
I saw a word I'd never seen before. Eukaryotic.
Oh yeah,
I had to look that up.
I'm trying to remember what that is.
It's like a phylum or something.
It's anything something to do with cells.
Single cell, right?
Yeah. The classification, right?
That has a nucleus. A cell that has a nucleus.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I had to look it up.
Oh, nucleus. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I think there might be other, a bunch of scientific terminology in the future. Or maybe not. I read it a while ago, so.
What do you think is sci-fi about this? The strange area, just biology, or I mean, it is clearly sci-fi. But I was curious what elements of it that all of you are most interested in.
Good question. Well, it has the science part. And that she's a biologist. It's got spores. It's got a sort of that hint of an intelligence to it, and it has the idea that this is something that could happen in our future of some sort. So it sort of fits the paradigm of science fiction in that regard. But it certainly is Earth based. You know, it's not kind of it's not indicated this is another planet or anything.
Yeah, although it does feel slightly alien.
Alien, yes.
Yeah.
The setting a little bit. I mean, not the movie Alien, but like just Alien in general. And so I was kind of wondering, is it Alien that is implanted here and buried here from long ago or what have you? I don't know, but that's all stuff that is way too soon to find out. So
Yeah. I like that. I like that it feels both familiar and Earth-like, but also has this different planet feel that I like in space-based sci-fi uh, novels.
yeah.
And I did also wonder briefly because the transition to Area X had weird lights, like
Mm.
lights that were shaking and stuff, almost if it was some sort of like wormhole gate transition to another planet. Um, or
Yeah, we don't quite know the conditions of travel to this area
Mhm.
yet.
Yeah.
We get yeah, like you said, lights and stuff hint, but nothing
Mm.
much really.
Yeah. So yeah, it does have that alien feel as well as the familiarity of an Earth-like setting. So that it's yeah, I can see this book becoming a favorite.
I also think that like sci-fi is in general like broad enough, like sometimes encompassing fantasy and sometimes encompassing pretty normal situation in which there's just a very slight difference, that it's hard to say what's the sci-fi element for now, because
Yeah,
it could be so many different things, right?
that's true.
Like
Yeah,
we don't even know what is it. Is it in the current time? Is it like 50 years ago? Is it 50 years in the future? Right?
Yeah.
Mm,
Could be a lot of different situations going on.
And a lot of sci-fi just tends to take what we consider to be our world and change one small aspect of it, or just introduce a new variable. You know, kind of here's a sci-fi novel. We can all of a sudden, you know, turn invisible. There you go. There's a science fiction novel in its own right that often falls into sci-fi horror in a lot of cases in the movies. But yeah, that's enough for it to just be like that. So
mm,
Yeah. And I just
and
thought of something good, what I was trying to think about before, what vibes it gives me. It gives me like very uncanny valley vibes, sort of. The descriptions, what's happening, the way her thoughts are, right? It's like, oh, it's so close. There's something wrong. I don't know what it is. It just feels slightly off, right?
I haven't. That's another show/movie that I haven't seen.
Oh, it's a term for like a psychological term, is it? I think
Oh,
for the human response to something that looks very human-like, but it's not yet. So it just feels off, and it gives that sort of very weird. Like if you see a mannequin and it's like 95% realistic, but the 5% makes it different enough that your brain can spot it, and it's like, this is dangerous, this is wrong. I don't want to be here or see it or interact with it, sort of thing.
I see. And what's the term again? Uncanny.
Uncanny
uncanny
valley.
valley. So if you had ever seen like I remember the terms used quite a lot, but the Final Fantasy movies, the Advent Children, was that the or no, whatever the movie was, where the animation was supposed to be sort of lifelike, but the eyes, etc., just aren't right. You know, and it just creates this. Everybody moves like a human, moves like it could be live action, but the eyes and stuff are just a bit unright. And it's why things like the Boston Dynamics, kind of dogs, etc., really flirt this line. One of the reasons that they are so scary in a lot of ways is because they do skirt the line of the uncanny valley, because they don't actually always look and move like machines. They move almost human-like, and that becomes truly terrifying at that stage when we can't spot the difference.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah,
That.
and this response doesn't trigger if it's different enough. Like if it's a doll, you know it's a doll. It's different enough. It's stylized, but you're like, okay, your brain can interpret it as being fake.
Yeah.
It's just when it gets confused that it's too similar.
Yeah. So another question I have on the sci-fi-ness of it all. So the other thing that sci-fi tends to do a lot is the exploration of ideas we talked about, right? So what ideas do you think this book is exploring so far?
That is a good question.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely thematically sort of rich. You get that feeling even off the first 35 pages. But I don't know if I could tell you exactly what the themes are exactly yet, aside from the fact that you know, the kind of, I think Dana pointed out this kind of lack of sense of community within the people, and you know, humanity in this alien sense. The one thing that should be human about it is a sense of community and a sense of working together, etc. But we don't get that, and again, that's sort of almost an uncanny valley kind of thing, in that they look like a team of humans, but they're not behaving like one at the moment. You know, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, it feels a bit more of a psychological piece rather than an idea piece. You know, maybe that's just because it's more modern, and that's, you know, and the writing, because that was huge in the 60s, you know, and early 70s was the idea thing, and that's what they focused on. I think as it stands right now, I think it's a bit more of a psychological piece, but we'll see.
Yeah.
What? Sorry, go ahead, Varsha.
Oh, I was going to say, maybe what's being explored, or at least one of the things, is what kind of psychological impact an environment like this can have on you.
Sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I agree with you. And like, we've already seen the author place heavy emphasis on the psychology and, you know, how they feel, and how even if it feels different than what they're seeing, right? Like, so their feelings and their interpretation of what they're seeing seems to be heavily emphasized.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Any other closing thoughts or non-closing thoughts that start up new discussions on the first chapter?
That's
what's going to happen in the next chapter to the expedition.
Stuff. I get the feeling that it's going to be very, very difficult to stop reading this. And as these chapters kind of going, if we're kind of going the way we're going, it's going to be like, oh, stuff is. I'll sniff the spores.
Don't do it, Chris. Don't do it, Chris.
Well, the next chapter is called Integration. So,
yeah,
something is gonna integrate.
the spores. The
Maybe
spores
just
are
math.
Yeah. It could be. They could. We could have a chapter. I'm down for it. A chapter in finding the area underneath the curve. It's just. It's my kind of story.
Nice. Oh, you gotta write that short story, Chris. The first one's called Initiation, which I thought it could have meant their initiation into Area X, but maybe it's also of the spores. Why can't I say that word? How is it pronounced? Initiation. Initiation.
Keep going, you'll get it. I believe.
So maybe it's the spores being initiated into her body. And then the next step is integration.
It does have a very like the word has a very ritualistic sort of feeling to it, right? Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Not like a scientific sort of word I would use.
Right.
Especially in conjunction with the words that suck you in as you read them. Yeah.
It's interesting how they choose some of the words. Like, I think Jared read a passage before, and they said that they were, what's the description they said for their arrival in Area X? I'm forgetting. Embedded, like something like that, right? Like that's the sort of thing that you use to describe when police go into like crime organizations or infiltration, right? That sort of thing. Not an expedition, I guess. I don't know. There are certain words which are interesting. It's like, why did he use these words instead of the more normal ones? Does it mean something? what is this supposed to make you feel, right?
Yeah, that is a great question. Embedded. I didn't notice that. Like, it does feel different, right? Like, it also stands out, but also just sort of subtle suggestions there about something different. Yeah.
Who knows?
So we'll be reading the next chapter, and Chris will not smell the spores or breathe the spores or whatever the verb is.
But the thing is, if I keep on reading, I'll find out what the spores do, and then I'll actually know. Knowledge is power. No?
Will you? I don't know if you will.
I wasn't fishing there at all, Don.
I also was thinking, oh shit, I want to read more. Oh, I've already read it, so I can go ahead. I have an excuse. I didn't. It took a lot of self-control not to do it.
Nice. I'm glad. And all of you, I'll do a hypnotic suggestion to make all of you continue exercising self-control to not read ahead. I'll be the psychologist of this group.
As you command, Vasha.
Yeah. Just another example. If anybody thinks Varsha's sweet and innocent, this is the kind of control that she exerts over all of these males.
Oh yeah.
Oh boy.
So I have this edition of this book, like this bind up hardback, and there is a boar on the first page.
Oh, cool.
So I think that boar is important.
Yeah, it's on my copy too.
Oh, nice.
Maybe.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there is actually something we didn't mention. There is an animal or something making noise at night that they said a low humming noise, right?
Yeah. And when they talked back to it while they were drunk as heck, well, not drunk as heck, just slightly drunk, it yelled back. It got louder and angrier.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
A smoke monster is coming for them.
I don't know. I would be that already would like tell me get the fuck out of here sort of vibe, right? It's
I'm no hero.
very
Yeah.
creepy.
I'm ready. Send me in.
Send me.
I'll just monitor from outside, I guess. I'd rather do that.
Yeah. So are we ready to start talking about understand? And
Yeah.
I guess then I'll jump ship then.
yes, and Dan will continue to join us for the Southern Reach discussions whenever he's able to, and maybe we can convince Dan to stay and read more books with us after we finish
Yay.
the Southern Reach.
Maybe I'm already like bailing out of half of the discussions I'm having of other random things happening and being busy and forgetting. So I don't wanna
Yeah. We'll take it a little
I'll
bit
try.
at a time.
I'll
So
try.
chapter 2 for next time. And yeah, we'll see Dan again next week.
Thanks a lot
Take
for
care,
the
Dan.
interesting discussion. Bye guys.
Bye, Dan.
See you then.
So now we talk about Understand by Ted Chiang. What did you guys? I kind of wish Steve had to also skip out for our audience because, but I kind of wish that I could have talked about the story with him because it reminded me a lot of a character from The Darkness That Comes Before. So maybe I'll have an offline conversation with him about it. But what did you guys think overall about the story?
Did anybody understand?
So,
Go for it, Varsha.
well, I mean, I think it's playing with a lot of ideas, and I think, was it the author's note at the end or the copyright, whatever, it said that
Story
this is
notes.
the story notes. It is apparently the oldest story in this collection, and that makes sense to me in the sense that a lot of the other stories we've read so far seem to be echoing the themes from this one, like the thing around how he tries to create a language which he can use very few words to communicate a lot, in which he is successful at creating even, or that reminded me a lot of the language that the aliens use in The Story of Your Life, which, I mean, it has a different purpose, but it works on a very similar level, right? Like the aliens are of a higher level intelligence, and so they or different intelligence, and they use language differently. And this guy has reached some critical mass in terms of the number of neurons, and and so he is able to not neurons, like synapses, and he is able to use language like that and communicate a lot of information with very little. So there's that, and then there's the aspect of, can you understand yourself? There's, I think, um I I've only like heard this on hearsay. I haven't actually read articles about this, but one of the things that's used to talk about how it is impossible for humans to understand consciousness, or like how our brain works. Gödel's incompleteness theorem is used
Okay.
to say that, like, we can't understand the system from within. So he sort of transcended that, and I think he uses the notion of consistency and completeness in that math story we read. What was that called? Division by zero. And then, yeah, I think that those were some themes that were echoing in his other short stories. I thought that was really interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I found it quite readable. It absolutely flew by, in terms of reading. Got to the end, and then the more I thought about it, the more it sort of annoyed me. Because I've sort of found this with most of the stories in this book. There's been something that it's not how that works. Like,
Hmm.
it's in this book, it's very much the difference between intelligence and knowledge. Like, he
Hmm.
seemed to accrue knowledge rather than an intelligence.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But he got a couple more neurons, and he was an expert programmer.
Yeah.
Like all of this kind of stuff about how the brain functions or biology or whatever. Intelligence and knowledge are not the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
you can have the
Yeah.
smartest person in the world and not be able to create knowledge. But I think you just have to switch your brain off from that and just kind of say, look, that's not what the story's exploring. In much the
Hmm.
same way as I can't watch the Reacher TV show and go, gravity doesn't work like that. People are hanging out of planes and stuff. That's not how gravity works. And you go, it's not the purpose of the show. Like, it's supposed to be fun, escapism stuff. We've just got to park it
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
kind of do that. But I found that same thing with this one. And I would say, if there's a frustration, I would say the last kind of 3 pages or the last 4 pages, the confrontation at the end was a bit.
Yeah.
It's like two people that have invented their own language, but didn't let you in on the joke.
Mm. Yeah.
With the cliff
Yeah.
notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't mind I mean, the ending it's a little bit anticlimactic, but it almost makes sense in a certain way, because if that's, if you put aside the what's that term, uh where you just accept the fantasy for what it is, uh
Suspension of disbelief.
suspension of this, yeah.
Storm.
If you do that, and you realize it, and you accept that these two guys got to this point, you know then you can accept the fact that it would actually be that quick,
Hmm.
because we can't as normal humans
Hmm.
go at that level, and so we can't really grasp how much has actually happened in the 30 seconds that they faced off
Yeah.
against each other,
Hmm.
and so that made sense from that standpoint. It kind of reminded me that there was a movie with Scarlett Johansson
Hmm.
where she suddenly got this super intelligence and was able to do
Oh yeah.
a whole bunch of stuff, and I can't remember the name of it for the life of me, um, but it was very similar to that. It had that feel,
Hmm.
and where all of a sudden she's super intelligent and outsmarting the government, and just like in here, and but I thought it was I thought it was cool. There was a lot of exposition
Hmm.
in this one. He's explaining a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I needed all that, but
Yeah.
but it was only 40 pages or whatever, so it was fine. And And so it was okay. It wasn't my favorite short fiction. I liked Nightfall better, but
Yes.
but it wasn't bad. It was definitely. I mean, he's a very skilled wordsmith,
Mm,
um, and so it was entertaining for one night's read.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very quick
It
read.
it was entertaining for sure, and it was interesting, but I agree with you, Chris. I found myself objecting with a lot of the implications or the assumptions that are underlying what's going on in the story. For instance, the idea that all you need, like, it's he does talk briefly about the notion of a soul and whatnot, but the fact that your intelligence increases, or like it's not just intelligence, right? It's almost like he's acquired another level of consciousness, and
Yeah.
that your the implication there is like it's completely material, the consciousness, like the source of consciousness he does. And I think this was the objection I had with what was the other story where they did this, um is that like you brief the question of free will in Story of Your Life, like it's briefly suggested that the author doesn't, or at least the narrator doesn't believe the implication, but I
Mm.
don't think there's enough to make a proper counterpoint and say that's not how it is, because the implication is still, it still holds, like logically that's what makes the most sense. And just that line there is insufficient for me to convince me that the narrator, at least, or maybe the author, thinks otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. Like to get to this super level of intelligence and evolve to this much higher state, and yet they can't get over ideological differences. They have to murder each other. Like that
Yeah,
seems the very antithesis of what higher state of consciousness should enable and do in a
yeah,
lot of cases. A lot of
Yeah, that's a
cases, I
good
find that
point
frustration.
because you would think with that higher level of consciousness would also take on a higher level of empathic um,
Yeah,
feeling,
understanding. Yeah,
understanding. Yeah, and that's the name of the story. So,
we got
uh, jeez. And so, how I mean, he explained it at the end as what was the term he used to explain his position? Because he's like the other guy, Reynolds, is going to has a philosophy that he's going to save the world,
hmm,
where he has a philosophy that he's going to do everything for himself. You know, so he's not a very likable narrator because he's
yeah.
how do you keep that level of selfishness at that level of consciousness?
hmm,
And so that's kind of like, hmm, that's what makes you stop and go, okay, did this story work?
Try not to think about it too much, and I think that is where I came to, because I don't accept that. That's, I mean, it's almost like a sociopathic behavior
Yeah,
at that stage. You know,
yeah,
it is not higher state of consciousness. It's more like devolved state of consciousness rather than do it. And if they actually had tied that to the fact that his was brain injury versus somebody else, maybe that might have made sense. But the whole idea of this thing was that it was the people with the most injuries in their brain that could
that's
develop the
right.
most intelligence. You know,
hmm,
uh,
That's right.
so it kind of. I mean, I like that concept. I like that idea of setting up why it worked for him and didn't work for others, etc. And I like the part where the CIA were kind of trying to test him and he could work out what was happening.
Yeah,
I liked
yeah,
all that,
that
but
was
that was
that was
clever.
cool actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that too.
And if the thing had a sort of wrapped up around that stage, I think it had a much better thought about it. But it sort of went off into this, like, this other level of trying to explain something that I just
hmm,
didn't buy. I
yeah,
don't think.
yeah. And even the groundwork for that, I like he said that it only makes any sort of change in people with damage. But he had
Mhm.
already had enough to rebuild everything that was broken. So why does taking the fourth vial or whatever continue to increase his
I hear
intelligence?
you.
And yeah, and yeah, that's the other thing. Like what you said, Chris, the intelligence versus knowledge. It, is that having more synapses? Is that what makes you? It's about inference, right, and reasoning and logic. A lot of those things play roles in intelligence, and sure, like he's not, making a biological case for this is how it is, but
Hmm.
once again, the implications bother me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's what it was. He was saying Reynolds was motivated by altruism,
Mm.
and he was only concentrating on understanding the sublime,
Hmm.
you know, beauty visible from enlightenment. And but if you're at that level of consciousness, why can't you do both? Like,
Yeah,
why
split.
Exactly.
can't you be altruistic and also have a sublime experience? I don't think. I don't know why it has to be either or.
Hmm.
I completely agree.
Yeah, and and that's the other thing. Like, why do they need to kill each other? It
Well, there
that
can be only one. I
just
don't know.
go on. Yeah, and and maybe he did this deliberately to be silly with the story, but I also didn't like how they could destroy each other. Like
Hmm.
use a kill switch to to turn the other person off, like to reset the brain. Okay,
Yeah,
cool
I mean,
story.
well, wasn't that like part of the exploration of language
Mm,
that he was trying to do? That language can get to a certain point where it's so powerful that you can actually kill somebody with a word.
Yeah.
mm,
Um,
interesting. To like
and
reset and rewire everything. Okay,
yeah,
that I could buy that. Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's and I like that part of it.
Hmm.
I actually like that playing with language aspect of it better than what we got in Babel 17.
Yeah.
Uh, but um, but
If
but the it was the stuff we were discussing before is what kind of throws it off a little.
if
Mm,
you've ever seen any of Darren Brown's stuff, it's a UK kind of psychologist who's made a TV career for himself. It talks about the power of suggestion. He does a couple of videos where he takes and plants suggestion into various people. And actually, his whole trick is that he gets people to do things that seem like magic, and then he spends the last 10 minutes of the show basically explaining exactly what he did to
mm,
make something happen. And there's a great episode where he takes three guys who are art directors in an advertising agency, and um they have to design a poster for London Zoo,
mm,
promotional poster for London Zoo. And they basically do it. They get a couple of hours to do it, and he has an envelope sitting on the table. And when they're finished, he pulls out what he had thought they were going to do versus what they actually did, and it's obviously very close.
mm,
And then he goes to explain about how he carefully planned the route that they took from when they were picked up from their house and the things that they would all see and they would all be in common for them, and actually how they had no other choice than to use that suggestion and actually incorporate those things into their doing. So everybody's suggestive, even people that are advertising executives or otherwise. So it's
mm,
kind of a similar idea in that one word that you can drop in somebody's head can actually, especially if you've done like they talked about the fact that when he was in the shop, he was already planting the seeds in
mm.
him around then, so he was sort of manipulating him from that end. So again, I sort of bought that I had some sort of level of understanding of what he was trying to go for there. But yeah.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I didn't think of it like that. I it felt almost like we were trying to control a machine, but with that context, I think it makes more sense. And I think that like even minus my philosophical objections, like from a story standpoint, I think he did lay the groundwork for how his characters transcended or like got to their next level of consciousness, right? Because he said chimps don't have a critical mass of synapses, so they uh, aren't intelligent the way humans are, and so he acquired critical mass to become the next level intelligent, like surpass humanity in intelligence, and so now he can understand as if from the outside what how everything works. Presumably, like humans understand or try to understand a lot of how chimps behave, I suppose. So yeah, it works as a story. I think it's well written and so on. But yeah, the philosophical implications continue to bother me in his stories.
Excellent.
Was there? Oh, and you mentioned Babel 17, Jared, and I did think this felt very similar in its exploration of language to Babel 17. That you can do a lot of powerful things with language by, and also the notion that, which I almost wonder if Chang was influenced by Delaney's story, that you can layer a single word to have enough meaning to, you know, destroy someone's brain, for instance. But similar, and that concept was also in Babel, right? Like
Yeah.
one word with a lot of
Yeah.
meaning. So it when that happens, I start to wonder whether they were influenced by each other or if they both had a common source of influence. So yeah, I was curious about that.
Yeah.
Cool. So next week we'll read 72 words. Shall we continue on with this?
Yes.
72
Yes.
letters. Sorry, not words.
72 letters. Okay.
Yeah. And the second chapter of Annihilation. So,
Hmm.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
if you're listening in, that's what we're reading for next week. To we'll continue discussing Annihilation, and we'll continue on with Ted Chiang's short stories. We have, I think, 3 more to go before we finish this collection, and we'll decide what to read after that. Meanwhile, we're working our way through Annihilation, and we'll meet back in a week. We'll see everyone then. Until then, Jared, Chris, uh, bye, everyone.
See you later.
We're still working on our intros and outros, but we'll see everyone next week. Bye.
Take care.